Welcome to the fifth session in the ICEC 75th Anniversary Celebration Series. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We warmly welcome Beverly Johns and her presentation, 75 Lessons We Have Learned About Behavior Over the Years. Beverly H. Johns began her professional career working with students with learning disabilities and severe emotional and behavior disorders in 1974. This evening, she brings with her 50 years of professional experience in varied roles, including special educator, administrator, professional fellow. She has taught classes in special education law, behavior management, adaptations, and on teaching diverse learners. Beverly Johns was the founder and administrator of Garrison Alternative School for students with severe emotional and behavior disorders in Jacksonville, Illinois. She was the coordinator of staff development for the Four Rivers Special Education District. She continues her professional commitment today as a learning and behavior consultant. She serves as the current president of Illinois Council for Children with Behavioral Disorders. She also serves as on the executive board of Illinois Council for Exceptional Children. Bev is the author of over 25 books on a varied topics related to special education. Over the years, she has received numerous honors, including the Council for Exceptional Children's Outstanding Contributor Award, Romaine Mackey Award from the former CEC Pioneers Division, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the CEC Division of the Visual and Performing Arts Education. Bev is the past president of Delta Kappa Gamma, Illinois, and currently serves as the president of the Learning Disabilities Association of Illinois. This evening, Bev Johns will address pressing questions and critical answers for our time. How have children's behavior changed over the years? How has our behavior had to change toward them? What have we learned about the management of children's behaviors? What positive behavior interventions work? We extend a warm welcome to Beverly H. Johns.
Oh, good evening. Thank you. Thank you. I am delighted and honored to be here. I actually spent my afternoon in Oklahoma, virtually, but with folks in Oklahoma talking about children with oppositional defiant behaviors. So anyway, tonight I thought we'd talk about 75 behavioral interventions, and I call this Lessons Learned from Striped Pedal Pushers, Dangling Earrings, and Paper Mache. So that's what we're going to talk about this evening. These are the pink striped pedal pushers. They're not exactly the replica of what I wore, but I remember vividly these beautiful pink striped pedal pushers, which now today we would call capri pants. And my mother and father had gotten me these capris, and I just thought the world of those pink striped pedal pushers. Well, in our neighborhood, we had a little boy. Actually, he was my age, and his name was Tommy. Actually, the other day I tried to look up to see whatever happened to Tommy. I don't know whether he's dead or alive, but I had my beautiful pink striped pedal pushers on one day, and here he came down the street making fun of my pink pedal pushers, saying, oh, you got your pajamas on. Well, I have to tell you, it was very interesting because I never wore capri pants until about 7 years ago. So the long-lasting effects of bullying, but then out of everything comes a silver lining. And Tommy was really my first experience. Today, he would have been probably, people would have said he had behavioral and emotional disabilities. He actually did not go to school. So anyway, just those things like that have long-lasting effects on us. So what he said, but then he was my first experience with someone who had some pretty significant issues. And, I've always wondered, well, whether uh, some of what I experienced with him caused me to go into the field of working with children with social emotional disorders. So anyway, then fast forward to my college education and the importance of watching your words. Um, I was in college and I had to take a teaching art class. And I'm very upfront with telling people that I'm not an artist. I mean, I grew up with my next door neighbor is a professional designer, and we would draw and have all kinds of fun. And I would follow the directions, and she'd follow the directions, and hers would look beautiful, and mine was different. And let's just say that. So anyway, you can imagine that my mindset going into this teaching art class was not really good because I knew I didn't have a lot of talent. So the teacher gave us this one assignment to do, and we were to make something out from paper mache, and we could choose. Now, it was a good thing the teacher said, you have a choice. And so I thought, well, I know what I'll choose. This was a Catholic college. So I thought, even though the teacher was not a nun, but I thought, oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I will do a paper mache nun. Thought, isn't this wonderful? So I did that paper mache nun. I worked so hard on it. I mean, I made sure I had enough newspaper on the shoulders and all of those things. I can still remember working on the paper mache nun. So I had it done, got it finished. And so we would go in the student lounge ahead of time, and we'd all be sharing what our project was. And somebody did a dinosaur, and somebody did a dog, somebody did a cat. And here I am with my paper mache nun. And frankly, the other students looked and said, wow, Beth, you really did a nice job. I thought I had, because I had put everything I had into it. So we go into class, and the teacher would go around and would single each one of us out and tell us what she liked and what she didn't like about our work. Well, I knew I had worked hard and I thought it was pretty good. So I was really prepared for a positive comment from this teacher. And she came by, looked at my nun, and she said one word. She said, that is trite, trite. I mean, talk about bursting your bubble with one word. But she didn't quit at that. She went on to say, you didn't try hard enough. And I never forgot that experience. And I vowed that I would never criticize children in front of their peers and would never say, which is a common thing that sometimes we do, you didn't try hard enough. I tried as hard as I could. I mean, I put everything into that. So I think we all have to be very cautious of what we say to children and provide constructive comments as opposed to comments that tear children down. It was only it's about maybe 5 or 6 years ago when I met Sue Dion in Delta Kappa Gamma that I started doing artwork. And she gave me a great deal of confidence. And now I actually have taken 3 years of painting classes. So, but it took me a long time to get over that. So then I went to college on a work study program because our family did not have a lot of money. And so I had various jobs through college that made me decide what I was going to do as a career. So for about 2 years after school, Saturday, Sunday, I worked with boys who had already been adjudicated delinquents between 9 and 14 years of age. And what stuck out from that experience was the fact that these were, again, 9 to 14-year-olds who they were excited about, when I get to be 18, I get to go to the state pen, which is a state penitentiary in Kentucky. And it really struck me that these children had given up hope. Their hope was gone. Actually, one of the children committed suicide. They all, struggled a great deal. And that's why I believe that we have got to empower children. We've got to do strength-based interventions, and we've got to provide things like stories with happy endings so that we don't have children saying, oh, when I get to be 18, I get to go to the state pen. That was very sad. So then my next one was never let students know that you're afraid of them. I did have a gun pulled on me when one of my other jobs was working at a community center at night in downtown Louisville, Kentucky. Not the best of neighborhoods, but that's where I was assigned to work. Remember, then I'm like 20 years old, and I am at this community center working alone at night, and a young man, and we had a rule that the boys, and it was all boys, the boys would have to bring their ID, and they couldn't get in unless they had their identification. So one night, this young man comes to the door, and I said, okay, let me see your ID. And he says, I don't have one, lady. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but our rule is that we have to have an ID to get in. So I'm afraid you won't be able to get in unless you have that. And he proceeds to pull a gun on me. Now, young and naive as I was, I thought it was a toy gun. And I said, oh, for crying out loud, put that silly thing away and go on home. And he did. I mean, he left. So after this event, the kids said, weren't you afraid of that gun? I said, oh, no, it was a toy gun. And they said, no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. Pretty soon, the police were there saying, lady, did you just turn away somebody who had a gun? I said, well, yeah, it was a toy gun. They said, oh, no, it wasn't a toy gun. But the point being is, I didn't let him know I was afraid of him. Obviously, if I would have known that it was a real gun, I would have been afraid. But there I am saying, oh, put that silly thing away and go on home, thinking it was a toy gun. So, but I think it's really important because so much, some we're afraid of children, and that really hinders our work with them. So we don't let them know we are afraid of them. So here was a third experience that I had working my way through college. And I have to tell you, having worked my way through college, I have a real appreciation for being able to go to school. But I worked at the Madison State Hospital in Indiana for, I think, 2 summers with individuals who were in the state hospital. And when I went to work there with some other college students, we really wanted to take the children outside. They were mostly 16, 17, 18 years of age. They were heavily medicated. And so we would be told, no, you can't take them outside. They're on heavy medications, Thorazine, they will burn, plus you're not going to be able to manage their behavior. Well, we finally talked the administrators into letting us take the students outside. It was a wonderful experience for them because they, in fact, were locked inside. And we did not have the behavior problems that we could have had. Now, we had to be very careful that we made sure that they had their hats on and that they were well covered so they didn't get sunburned as a result of the Thorazine. But it just spoke to me about the importance of getting our children out. And what I think is very interesting nowadays, we're all talking about nature and getting children out in nature, and individuals who have ADHD are reporting that that is a way that they're able to calm themselves. So it was a good lesson learned. So then I'll take us to 1968 because that was a time when we were starting programs for children with emotional and behavioral problems. Um, at that time, there was not a law in Illinois that said they could go to school, but school, there were fellowships, and I was fortunate after having gone to college. I did receive a fellowship for study at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and that was wonderful for me. But were there people who said, "Oh, you are a woman, you can't go into that field?" I said, "Oh, yes, I can." So it was a terrific experience. One of the experiences that we had as part of that fellowship is we took a trip to UCLA to Lovas's program in Los Angeles, where they used electric shock with children. And they didn't call it electric shock. They would say, "We're getting out the stick." And being young and naive, I thought, what is a stick? Well, I found out. I mean, it was electric shock, aversive, uh, and the children there in that program were head banging. They had a lot of real issues, but I never forgot the experience. And I thought, I hope that we're not going to ever use that in the state of Illinois for children in schools. And then I was a camp counselor one summer, which was an interesting experience because my idea of camping is a Holiday Inn. And I had four little boys who had emotional problems, and one of whom was a bedwetter. And so I'd have, and then sometimes the cabin would leak and we'd have to put, all of the beds in the middle. It was quite an experience, but that was my first experience. And I am grateful for my entire career. I had the opportunity beyond my master's degree to study applied behavior analysis with Dr. Beth Sulzer Azaroff, who I kept track of her and communicated with her until 2 years ago when unfortunately she died. She truly practiced what she preached, and she taught me the importance of praise for our children who have behavioral problems. So she was a leader in the field of applied behavior analysis and autism. She taught me the terms praise, fading, that I used all the time in the classroom, the ways to give children maximum cues and then slowly pull those cues away. She taught me backward chaining, where you would do all but the last step with the child so the child immediately had success. She said, "You're not going to see miracles overnight, and so you need to reinforce successive approximations. So the closer you get to the child being able to do it, you need to reinforce it." Incidentally, I was at SIU Carbondale during the riots, and the good thing that happened during the riots is I met my husband because I was at the university by then teaching, and he was in graduate school. And they had to close the school because the parents were afraid to send their children to school. And then the dangling earrings. Uh, I was a brand new teacher. I took a job in Carbondale accepted the job in December. The job started in January. And it was very interesting because I was coming out of graduate school and I thought, I've got this. I'm smart. I have all the answers. And then they said you're going to have 7 children. I thought, well, this is a piece of cake. 7 children. This will be easy to do. Well, I got into the classroom, and sure enough, I had biters, kickers, scratchers, you name it. And I had little Jimmy, and by the first 2 weeks, I was full of bite marks and scratches. And I thought, what have I gotten myself into? Well, I wore dangling earrings because I wanted to look my best. After all, I'm a new young teacher. No problem. Guess what happened to me? And you can't see um, my ears, but if you know me, you know that I always wear big dangling earrings now, but they're clip because they cover up the fact that I have a permanently slit ear. Because one day with my dangling earrings, Jimmy was angry about something, and Jimmy pulled my ears and slit my one ear, and then after a number of years, it pulled all the way out. Now you're saying, for crying out loud, why don't you get your ears fixed? Because I'm a cheapskate and I'm a scaredy cat. So I just keep my, slit ear to remind me of that I never had all the answers. I thought I did, but oh my goodness. And the point being is we never have all of the answers, because about the time that we think we've got it figured out, everything that our children can do, they come up with something brand new. So support systems, I learned at the end, what saved me first year of teaching was a wonderful social worker. And that social worker came into my classroom at the end of every day and asked how things went, made no judgments against me, just talked. And that support system is really what kept me going. I think that in today's schools, sometimes we don't have people who can go in and just listen to the teacher talk about what their day was like. And I also had good administrative support as well. Those systems are critical when people are working with children with significant behavioral and emotional problems. And then here's another point that I learned early on. And the children with whom I worked with had been diagnosed as autistic like, because back then they didn't really use the term autism, they said autistic like. So here I was going to teach these children, and I didn't know them and they didn't know me. And remember, I'm taking the job in January when the other teacher walked off the job in December and never came back. So I thought, oh, I don't think it's going to be a good idea for me to just wait till the children come to my classroom. So what I did was, and I will always be a proponent of home visits because I went to the homes of the children, which really taught me a lot. I got to know the parents, I got to know the children. And then the next step after I had done the home visit was that I asked the parent to bring the child to the classroom with just me, so the child could see the classroom and be better prepared to come to school rather than getting on a bus and getting off the bus and saying, surprise, here's your new teacher and here's your classroom. It doesn't work with children with autism. So that's how, and that was a wonderful experience because, again, I learned the value of home visits and how important it was to build a positive relationship with parents, and why. And it was even more important during that frame of time because This was during the time that Bruno Bettelheim was running the Sonia Shankman Orthogenic School in Chicago. I wasn't in Chicago, but he was running that. But he wrote a book and it was called Love Is Not Enough. I still have that book to remind me of the guilt trip that that man put on parents because he coined the term refrigerator mothers. And he said, oh, children with autism have refrigerator mothers, and it's all the mother's fault because they are cold individuals. So I knew, and these parents, your heart broke for them because they were feeling very guilty. The mother's thinking, what did I do wrong? And they were not by any means refrigerator mothers. So I will never forget that experience. So now, how many behavior interventions have you learned from this history? You want to put them in the chat?
Actually, maybe rather than put it in the chat, I can just maybe share a little bit about what I heard as you were chatting
Okay.
and giving us the background. And that is probably one of the things that sticks with me the most is that um, so many behavior interventions can be implemented through relationships with kids. One of the things that you really you seem to talk a lot about, maybe even not even directly, was about the importance of, like when you talked about the home visits, that's about the relationship. When you talked about making sure that you are, um, even the refrigerator mom part, which is this last one, that's not a way to cultivate a relationship. So instead of the blame game, it's like inviting into the relationship. So, I mean, a lot of the interventions from what I heard kind of fall under that umbrella, perhaps maybe is the best way to say it.
Okay, very good. Thanks. Others? Okay, so we'll move on. My why for advocacy, because I have advocated for years for children with emotional behavioral problems and children with learning disabilities, actually, and now adults who have disabilities as well. And what is my why? So the classroom that I was assigned to was in Southern Illinois. It was called the day school for children with emotional and behavioral problems. So I was assigned to teach this classroom, and one of my 7 students was a little girl, and her name was Sally. And when they continued my class, Sally came to school for the first time, and she was 10 years old. Her mother lived in a small community outside of Carbondale. Her mother had 10 children. Sally had an unrepaired cleft palate, significant motor problems, speech and language problems, and very significant behavior problems. So every year, Sally's mother would take her to the school, her local school, and the principal would take a look at Sally, who was having trouble walking and she couldn't she couldn't talk. And the principal would say, well, of course, she can't come to school. Sally's mother would take her back home. She sat at home for that year. The next year, when school registration came along, Sally's mother would take her to school again. They'd take a look, the principal would look at Sally and say, she can't go to school. She can't learn. It wasn't until we had a law in the state of Illinois that actually was ahead of the law of IDEA, the old Education for All Handicapped Children Act. It wasn't until we had a law in the state of Illinois that she said she had a right to go to school, did she get to go to school. Now, what do we know about early intervention? I mean, how awful that she did not get to go to school until she was 10 years of age. Now, the positive side of that, again had a good relationship with Sally and with her mother. She really didn't have that many behavioral issues with me. We were able to take her to Barnes in St. Louis, get her cleft palate repaired, and she did fine. But what could we have done if we could have gotten her and helped her at the age of 3? So I never forget, and I never will forget Sally. And when people say, oh, we're always going to have a law for children with disabilities, I remind people they giveth and they can taketh away. And I lived through 80, 81, 82, where they tried to eliminate the mandate for special education. But Sally, you know, um, reminds me that every child has the right to go to school. So let's talk about some other interventions that I learned about early on and that I absolutely loved to use. If you ask what some of my favorite interventions, some of you may have heard of Nintendo effect. Obviously, what does that mean? It's interest-based interventions. We know that a number of our children like to do things. So I remember this other child I had, the second or third year I taught. Everything was the weather. Everything was the weather. Today it is partly cloudy. It's going to be 62 degrees with a 70% chance of rain. And he loved to talk about the weather. Well, what would people tend to do? Say, would you please quit talking about the weather? But we learned to channel the weather into his reading. I did math using the Nintendo effect of what he liked to do, which was the weather. And some more of my favorite based interventions besides interest-based ones. I learned early on that one size does not fit all. And I'm reminded, I've had this young man in my class, and he was 8, but he weighed well over 100 pounds. And a lot of our children were on programs to improve their speech and language skills, et cetera, et cetera. And the speech and language folks used reinforcers. So I had children who had M&Ms, cereal, and Don's was bacon. I mean, now bacon was the worst thing he could have had, and he was overweight in the first place. But bacon was what was reinforcing to Don. Now, the first year I taught, I had no paraprofessional, which in fact guided me in saying, we will never set up behavior disorders programs where people don't have a paraprofessional. So what I had to rely on we were up on the second floor, the bus would pull up and drop the children off, and they would walk on their own up the stairs. One day, and Don's mother would fry all the bacon for his reinforcement. So one day Don doesn't come to class, and the social worker walked by, and I said, do you know what's happened to Don? Is he absent today? Because again, I couldn't leave my classroom to see what had happened to him. She said, well, I don't know. Well, so it must have been, I don't know, 10 minutes later, here comes Don walking into my classroom going, hee. It was not verbal. Hee, happy as he could be. And I thought, well, this is strange. And you do detective work when you're working with children. So I just happened to say, oh, let's check your lunchbox, make sure you have your bacon for when you see the speech language therapist. And guess what? All the bacon was gone. He had sat at the foot of the steps and eaten it all. So anyway, so one size doesn't fit all. How many other children might want bacon? They might want a lot of other things. And in fact, what the research says is that we often don't choose things for reinforcers for children that either they are meaningful or they're not meaningful. We don't have a good handle oftentimes about what is reinforcing to children. And then my very favorite behavior intervention came from Eleanor Getzlow. Paula and I wrote a book with her on curriculum, and it's be positive, be brief, and be gone. I always say to people, if you don't do anything else, remember positive, brief, and gone. Meaning, you want a request from a child, you say, I need you to start your math. That's positive and that's brief. But here's the kicker. People will hover over the child like, I'm going to stand over you until you do what I want you to do. No, we need to move away from the child because that gives the child a chance to auditorily process what we said to them, and it also gives them a chance to save face. So we just move away. It is a very powerful, simple intervention. And then community service. I am a firm believer in community service, getting children out in the community, doing for other people so that they feel like they are of value to other people rather than the other people owe them. And then my motto is never take good behavior for granted, reinforce it. And someone earlier today said, well, what if they don't ever do anything good? Oh, they always do something that is good. I mean, I was working with my little guy named Andrew, and he would put his head down on the desk and he wasn't going to do anything. It's like, if you think I'm here to work, no, I'm not. So he'd put the head on the desk, he wasn't going to do anything. Let me tell you, the minute that head came up and he picked up the pencil, I was over there saying, I made a good decision for yourself. How can I help you? But we have to look for good behavior. And with a lot of our children, sometimes people get in a negative mode and don't look for the good. And then choice is all about, we need to give our students voice. And choice is an easy way to do that. Good research out there, that is a high-powered intervention. If you would, something as simple as you can do your math paper in using a red pen or a blue pen, they're more likely to do it. It's a really easy intervention. Someone said, oh, that's a tier 2 intervention. Oh, for crying out loud. It's a tier 1 intervention. We could build in choice. And depending upon the age, we don't overdo the choices. So you don't give little kindergarten children 5 choices, but choice is very powerful. And then response cards. And rather than, so what do we see? So teacher, ask a question. Well, it's the same children, all the time who answer the question. Well, so response cards, would in fact say, have them write it down on a card, use clickers, have polls, all of those things which give every student a chance to respond to what you want them to do. And then active listening, and that is so much easier said than done. We need to remember with our children, we need to listen to understand, not to respond. We need to really listen to what they are saying to us. And then we also need to remember that we do not want to deny their feelings. So if they're telling us that something we are expecting them to do is too difficult for them, and they say, it's too hard, I can't do it, we need to look at it. But what we can't do is say, oh, for crying out loud, that's easy. No, it isn't for them. It is hard. And then hopefully all of you know Q-tip, which is quit taking it personally. They will call you names, fatty, thunder thighs, and the list goes on of some of the names that I have been called. but we have to make sure that we don't let children know that the comments they're making are getting to us. So now let's do a little fill in the blanks. So power struggles don't work. When you back a student in a corner, they are going to what?
Well, they have no place to go but at you.
Right. They are going to probably fight when you back them in the corner. Can't tell you the number of schools, I've worked with, and they will back the kids in a corner and wonder why the children are going to fight. Well, they are, because you can't back them into a corner.
Yeah.
So
It's
how about
also, Bev, the opposite of choice making, it's kind of
yes. Mhm.
taking away choice making and
And it's taking away their voice. Exactly. Like,
mm.
I don't care what you think. This is the way it's going to be. Exactly. There's no choice there. All right. Instead, remember calm, slow rate of speech, non-confrontational, and avoid what kind of questions?
Why
Yeah.
questions, maybe?
Oh, who said why? Why questions? Why questions are not going to get us anywhere. I remember one time, we were at school, the police called and said, we're going to need to come over because one of your kids has stolen a boom box. And they had evidence he has stolen the boom box. And I said, and why did you steal that? Because I wanted it. I thought, oh, I don't think we got anywhere there. So avoid the why questions. And when we are having a problem with a student, the first place we need to look is
Well, I'm a system person, so the first place I'm gonna look is at myself.
exactly. When I'm having trouble with a child, I need to look at myself. I may not be regulated, or the child might get on my nerves. I remember working with a young man, and it was very interesting because I didn't like him as well as some of the other children. You know how they say you're supposed to love all the children. You don't love all the children. I mean, some of them, and I really could not pinpoint what it was, but I was able to pinpoint it was me. And so I would say to the rest of the staff, I need you to monitor my behavior. I'm trying. But if I at any time give him a consequence that is unfair, or I'm saying something that I shouldn't say, you need to tell me. And it wasn't until a few years later that I finally figured out what was happening. I didn't have a bias against him. I had a bias against his mother. She lived in our community. She was in what I saw as a very happy marriage. And she left her husband to get involved with a drug dealer. And so that was my bias. And I was doing it against the child. But it took me a long time to figure out, why was I biased against this child? So we don't always know it. Hopefully, we are continually monitoring our own behavior, so that we are being fair to the children with whom we work. And then why are we seeing, more anxiety? There was a study that came out not too long ago that talked about we're not giving our children enough time to play. They don't have the play opportunities that children had some 20 years ago, even. So in the classroom, we just need to have more fun and certainly use games. Red rubber ball was one of my favorite things, and the custodian would say, how many more of those red rubber balls are we going to have? in the school, because you would just take a red rubber ball and you could put math problems, you could put science questions, and then the children could either do it as a team game or individually, and you would write math problems all over the red rubber ball, and then they would catch it, and wherever their left thumb landed was the question they would answer. So I used to have so much fun with that. Wheel of Fortune, Family Feud, Two Truths and a Lie. So much fun. So now let's do a Wheel of Fortune. Anybody a Wheel of Fortune fan as much as I am? My father-in-law, who has now passed away, but you never called him at 6:30 in the evening because that was Wheel of Fortune, and he loved Wheel of Fortune. So, and I love Wheel of Fortune. So what is our first word there? Anybody want to take a guess at that?
I think it's praise, Bev.
Praise, exactly. And again, the children with whom we often work sometimes are reprimand magnets. They set themselves up to be reprimanded, and we've really got to look for the positive and never take good behavior for granted. All right, how about the second one?
I'd say that one's choice.
Choice. It is choice, the power of choice, either with behavior, or you can do the odd numbered math problems, you can do the even numbered problems, or pick any six. I mean, oh, there are just so many wonderful opportunities to build in choice. And the third one. Anybody know this one?
Gosh, Bev, I don't know. You must have.
Okay, all righty. It's the Premack principle.
Okay.
Been around actually since 1959, but the Premack principle we use all the time in today's world, especially with children with autism. First, we do this, which is the non-preferred activity. Then we get to do the preferred activity. But there's a common problem sometimes with first then or Premack principle. And incidentally, it's also called Grandma's law, and I'll tell you why it's called Grandma's law. But if we expect a child to do a non-preferred activity for which they don't have the skill, we've set them up for failure. So we expect to say, oh, you do these 3 math problems, and then you could have X number of minutes on the computer. But if they don't have the skill to do the 3 math problems, it doesn't work. So we have to be really careful with Premack principle. Premack principle is also Grandma's law. I would stay with my grandmother a lot, and my grandmother would want me to eat my peas during the meal. And so she'd say, okay, first, Bev, eat your peas, and then you can have a piece of German chocolate cake. Well, you better believe I was going to eat those peas because I wanted a piece of German chocolate cake. Then my grandmother got really astute and she used choice. She'd say, oh, Bev, eat your peas, and then you can have your choice of a piece of German chocolate cake or lemon meringue pie. Hard choice, I must say. And that's why when I stayed with her, I was a bit overweight because she was a wonderful baker. But that's Premack, also called Grandma's law, also first then. But it can be very effective if the child, obviously I had the skill to eat the peas. So, and the next one, what is that one?
Response card, Bev.
Right, response card. And remember, we talked about that as an alternative to hand raising so that in fact students get involved in answering questions. And the last one, does anybody know this one?
Behavior momentum.
Behavior momentum, which is one of my very, very favorite behavior interventions. And it goes like this. And some people will say, very different variations, 3, 4, or 5 items that you expect the child to do that are very, very easy. They do them, you say, thank you, way to go. They do another one, thank you, way to go, another one. And then we give them the more difficult thing to do. And research says that they are more likely to be able to do it because it's like a snowball. We built up momentum for success for them. That's why we always start our day in any classroom or any class period with things that children do well. Don't ever start the day with things that children don't do well, because you're setting yourself up for failure. So behavior momentum. And then I used to also build behavior interspersal, which would be once they were getting into the more difficult task, then occasionally I would throw in some easy things for them to do in between, so they would kind of get a break from the more difficult items. So social skills, and today we've always got to look at whether we have to assess social skills just like we assess academic skills. Is it is it a performance deficit, or is it a fluency deficit? And if we don't know whether it is a skill deficit or a performance or a fluency deficit, we need to assume it's a skill deficit and teach it. I hear a lot in schools, well, by golly, they're 10 years old and they should just know how to behave. That isn't always the case. So we always have to look. So we're having trouble with a child. Did the child understand what was the appropriate behavior? It's very important for us to remember. And then when a child makes a mistake, we need to be empathetic, like, saying, I know what that's like, putting yourself in their place, and then give them some insights. So we might say, I think maybe if you added this step, you would get that right. So some insight so that they learn from what they did in the mistake, and then optimism. And optimism is very, very important for children. And I know that you can do this. So empathy, insight, optimism. And then movement. One of my favorite things to do with children, because I used to work at an after school program, these children would bring a stack of worksheets. And you'd think, oh no, I mean, we really have to do all these worksheets. And they were children with ADHD. That, okay, what are we going to do? So I thought, they can't sit here and do all of these worksheets. So what I would do is I'd take each worksheet and I'd cut it up. And I would tape it up around the room. And then the children could move around the room doing the assignment. Same way with carousel brainstorming, you can use that for writing. I love carousel brainstorming. I use it occasionally for adults to problem solve situations. So I might put 5 large sticky notes around the room, and I would have a different problem at each station. Either do it as a group assignment or as an individual assignment, depending upon the group of students you have. So they do one problem, and then you play the music and they move to the next one until every student has moved to every problem. So it's movement. And then pedals. I don't know how many of you have used these, but actually I also used to use them not only at high school, but at the college level for students who needed movement and they were like kicking their feet back and forth or whatever. I put those cheap little that I used to get at Lillian Werner pedals under their desk, and then they could pedal as they worked. Clue is another thing that I like to do that got kids up moving, which is I would put, so whatever we were going to study that day, and let's say I was looking for a vocabulary word, I would put clues on sticky notes under the desk around the room. And the students would have to go around, figure out the clues, and solve what the vocabulary word was. So just movement, which is something I feel is very important for students. And then after the pandemic, what happened to some of our children? First of all, the disappearance of cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility is an executive function skill. And one of the things that we know about cognitive flexibility is children may have trouble transitioning from one activity to another activity. Or if their structure or their routine is upset, and think about how often it was upset during the pandemic, they become very upset about it. And so we find that we have more children with anxiety because we aren't preparing them enough for changes in the schedule, for transitions, etc. And then a number of our students also lost auditory processing skills. I've written on this topic quite a bit because it's really important that teachers know how fast the children in their classroom can process auditory information, because we live in a rush society. And people say, come on, answer that so we can move on to the next problem. Come on, answer that. And we rush them. And some of our children, if they're experiencing anxiety, they're having trouble processing information. Loss of stamina. Some of our children, actually, many adults, lost stamina during the pandemic. And unfortunately, look at the figures about what's happening with children. Some of them have got out of the habit of going to school, and we're having a hard time getting them to come back to school. So just some real challenges that we're facing. And then, of course, one of my early books was on reduction of school violence, alternatives to suspension. I finished my career in the public schools never having suspended a child from school. And some people would say, well, you didn't work with anybody with a significant behavior problems. Oh, yes, I did. But the issue is that I can remember one student coming into our school, and he used to, in his regular high school, he used to go out and cause a stir in the hallway, and they'd say, well, you're suspended. So he got to our school, sure enough, he's trying that junk too. He's going out in the hall, he's causing a disturbance, we're getting him quiet. One day he broke down and cried. And he said, just what is it that I got to do to get kicked out of this place? And I said, nothing. I said, I want you here at school. I'm glad you're here. It's kind of like once we got through that, he thought, oh, all those games that I played in my other school are not going to work here because they want me here at school. So logical consequences for inappropriate behavior, that is designed to teach, graduated consequences, and then always earn privileges with any consequences. We always focus on the positive. So I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about some new projects that I am working on. I'm in the middle of a book on oppositional defiant disorder. And what is being found with those children is not only do they have comorbidity with a lot of other conditions like ADHD, depression, learning disabilities, and the list goes on and on. But oppositional defiant disorder is an emotional regulation problem. So we have to spend more time co-regulating with them, mindfulness strategies, and cathartic dumping, which in other words, we have a lot of children who are angry, and they have to have outlets for that anger, because if they come into the classroom, they're upset about something, their working memory is not intact. So we have to look at a variety of activities. So that's why I now also have a real appreciation for the arts with students. And speaking of, I'm also in the middle of editing a book with two other colleagues on arts as restorative. And why this is a wonderful avenue for us to build more of the arts into our classrooms. And it's a connector for learning. It gives hope. Remember at the beginning, I talked about how our children need hope, and it gives them a different way to tell their story. So, some practical strategies. We're looking at drawing, painting, cartooning, rock gardens, mandalas, feeling collages, writing. It's a wonderful cathartic experience for children unless they have a written expression problem. And then we're going to look at something else. And then multimedia collages. This is kind of interesting because children with emotional and behavior problems, tend to be critical of their own work. And so they might rip up their work and throw it on the floor. What multimedia collages can do for the children, the teacher keeps those pieces of what they tore apart. Later, they can put those with several other pieces and create a multimedia collage. So, so some just exciting, fun things to do with children so that they have all of those emotional outlets. And then I just want to close certainly with the next conference coming up is the Illinois CCBD Summer Conference, which is August 2, and that will be in person at the Northfield Inn and Suites. And I invite everybody to attend that. And I will close in with what is it? How can we keep ourselves going? And also, how can we keep people in our field? And one of the first things is trust, finding support networks. So our Illinois CCBD board has Solutions Sunday on the third Sunday of the month, where teachers, if they're having problems with a student, they can come. It is a safe environment. We're not going to go out and say, oh, this teacher said they had a problem with so-and-so, and I'm going to spread it around. No, I mean, it is a safe environment because I think that educators need a network of trusting individuals. And just like our children need relationships, we need relationships. And my third point is collaborate through professional organizations. So I see too many people isolating themselves and not being a part of their professional organizations. And I will tell you that if it wouldn't have been for the Council for Exceptional Children, the Council for Children with Behavioral Disorders, I would have never met, well, actually, I would have never met Paula. I would have never met and had an opportunity to write with Jim Kaufman, who is the person I consider the father of behavior disorders. I would have never had the chance to grow professionally. So I would someday like to see us have more and more people come back into professional organizations and not to isolate themselves, because we learn so much when we all work together. And finally, be a lifelong learner. We never have the answers, all of the answers. We sure wish we did. As I said early on, I went into the field thinking, I got this, I can do any of this. And I found out how much I really didn't know. So we all can be lifelong learners. We all read, we all study. And those are the things that keep us going. So thank you for being with me this evening.
Well, thank you, Bev, for your amazing presentation, and so much to think about and remember and read about and study and talk about. Is there any comment or question for Bev before she leaves?
I don't have any, thank you.
Good. Thank you for being around, Monica. I'm delighted to see you there.
Thanks,
Okay.
Monica, for coming.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Karen, do you have any question for Bev before we end?
Nope, I'm good.
Yeah, well, thank you so very much. And I look forward to our continued collaborations. Thank you for that,
Thanks.
Karen. That's great. And we can now stop our recording.